This is the second of my videos digging into the history of Troy weight. The study of the history of weight standards began in earnest about 400 years ago, and in the long run it has always been at best a 2 steps forward and 1 step back kind of thing. In recent decades it became more like 1 step forward and 2 steps back. In this episode I will sketch the bare bones of what most likely happened in the development of weight standards over the last 10,000 years or so. Inevitably much is speculative. Detailed examination of the evidence for these conclusions will have to wait for a later episode. Here is a model of what I think happened, which viewers may begin to ponder. Humans began to live communally by farming grain perhaps 10,000 years ago, and the new habit brought new challenges. If one harvest is to support a single family or many more and still keep grain for next year's seed corn, some kind of accounting system would have to evolve. It seems sensible to think about just 3 important measures in connection with this. Firstly, the daily grain or bread requirement of an individual. What counts as a bellyful? Long practice, from many sources, seems to point, very approximately of course, to about 500 grams, if wheat or bread. Secondly, how many days are there from harvest to harvest? Most very ancient societies seem to have figured this as being, for practical purposes, 360 days. Thirdly, what is the simplest measure nature provided us with? Clearly it is the heap of grain that can be scooped up in the cupped hands. That measure lacks a name in English, but it has been suggested the French once had one, a jointee. Here is me measuring it. And the result is roughly 250 grams. Logically, this suggests that as grain-dependent societies developed, they would begin to measure in jointees of about 250 grams, 2 of which made a man-day ration of about 500 grams, and 360 of which was enough to get each person comfortably from one harvest to the next. Of course, we have no direct evidence for any of this. Physical weights hardly seem to exist before about 3000 BC. However, it is certain that before 2000 BC, the very ancient Sumerian mina was fixed close to 500 grams. Not only that, the word mina actually means count, or perhaps a count. Far away and rather independently in early China, the basic jin weighed close to 250 grams. These facts all seem to fit with what is here imagined. The Sumerians figured in units of 60. We inherited that Sumerian system of counting in 60s for our minutes and seconds. Perhaps more interestingly, we still figure the circle as 360 degrees. Conceivably, both practices have roots in calculations concerning a 360-day year. As we will come to later, their figuring of weight, 60 shekels to the mina and 60 mina to the talent, did not entirely disappear, it just became less obvious. Whilst other states developed rival standards, the original Sumerian 500-gram mina stayed fixed in Mesopotamia, and its use spread widely. Crucial to the current story, a version of it seems to cross the sea, probably from Egypt towards Europe before 1500 BC. First in Crete and then spreading to Mycenae, the system was again based on about a 500-gram mina, but now it was divided in a binary fashion, and especially into a double ounce of about 62 grams. As such, of course, it near exactly replicates the version of Troy apothecaries we saw in episode 1, adopted at the Tudor court of Elizabeth I in 1588. Detailed work on early Cretan weights published by Petruso in 1992 postdates the Skinner book recommended in the last video. It indicates a system of the simple binary splitting of the minor ultimately into an ounce, a 16th, and indeed a quarter ounce, a 64th. Professor Petruso is immersed in modern archaeological ideology and so tends to treat all the weights anyone dug up as equally valid. He applied complex statistical methods to this data, fixing the minor variously at 483 grams or 488 grams or 493 grams. If we look instead at what we might think of as his best example, a single full minor marked with a value, we find it is 506.6 grams. So around 500 grams seems a good enough conclusion in reality. In his own words, Petruso also follows modern archaeological ideology in allowing no sweeping historical conclusions. Exactly why he does this is hard to understand. It is a plain fact that this system, in use in Greece before 1500 BC and spreading thence to the Greek mainland, was very similar indeed to the Troy Apothecaries standard of 16th century England. Of course, we can, and indeed must, debate whether or not this was some kind of coincidence, but that it is a fact cannot and should not be suppressed. What happens once weights and weighing enter Europe seems to me very curious indeed. I do not know what to make of it, so we'll just give you the facts and let you decide. Within Europe, primarily Germany and France, a series of bronze weights appear after 1500 BC. Flat bronze rectangles inlaid with wavy lines of copper. Published by Pear in 1999, he rather courageously linked them to the sort of system seen much more clearly in Crete. In reality, they are rare items, and any underlying system is hard to spot. However, this period gives us our first British weight, coming from a ship wrecked off Salcombe in Devon around 1300 BC. A crude piece, but at 29.8 grams, perhaps not such a bad shot at a troy ounce, especially after 3,000 years in the sea. After that, we get a great silence from the northern European archaeological record. Around the Mediterranean, a chaos of competing weight systems emerges, followed by competing coin weight systems. Alongside them, in northern Europe, apparently nothing. This silence is broken only after 200 BC or so by a unique find from Manching in Germany. Two weights which at 62 grams and 125 grams are a near perfect match for 2 and 4 troy ounces respectively. Found alongside them at Manching was a huge hoard of so-called rainbow cup Celtic gold coins, their given weight of about 7.5 grams also being quite a good fit for a quarter of a troy ounce. If we turn to the earliest Celtic coins found in England of a similar date, the imported Gallo-Belgic issues, they are an even better fit. This is Van Arsdale's Gallo-Belgic type AA1, the given weight of 7.8 grams being an excellent version of a quarter of a troy ounce. Leaping forward yet again by another 600 years or so, when the various barbarian tribes of northern Europe finally overran the Roman Empire in the west, they inherited a gold solidus which followed Roman practice, weighing about 4.4 grams. However, they reduced it to a standard of 3.9 grams. This has long been recognised by Grierson and others as both a specifically Germanic standard and as an eighth of an English troy ounce. Here is a Frankish example struck for Childebert. Around the same time, we find some weights from the 6th to 7th century, early Anglo-Saxon England, which seem to be to Troy standard. Many have been convinced of this for a century or more, but they are found alongside many other weights which just do not fit. It's all very puzzling. What can we say about all this evidence? That is up to you. If you are a glass half full sort of person, you will say, all the evidence points towards a version of the Troy system arriving in Europe from Crete before 1500 BC and being maintained in the north, beyond the walls of the Roman Empire, right down to Anglo-Saxon times. But if you're a glass half empty sort of person, you will look at all the gaps and say it means nothing at all. It is your choice. To recap, the system fixed in Sumer was of about a 500 gram mina divided into 60 shekels of 180 grains, thus 10,800 grains in total. That system was rigorously conserved through the Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian and Achaemenid periods. The palace weights of Darius from around 500 BC show his mina was very close indeed to 500 grams. This one in the British Museum, for instance, indicates a mina of 500.19 grams. Only in 331 BC, when Alexander conquered Persia and imposed his Attic standard on the coinage, was this continuous tradition broken, thus after 1700 years. Alexander, however, was not the end of our story. Strangely, we do not seem to have discovered any Sassanid weights at all, but their silver drams show a quantum change in their weight standard, down from a version of the Attic standard at about 4.25 grams to a version of the old Sumerian Persian half shekel at around 4.13 grams around the year 460 AD. That change in coin weight might seem just a coincidence were it not for the evidence from after the Muslim conquest of Persia. The early Arabs had a minor weight which they called the Ratl Kabir, that is to say, the Great Pound. From inscribed weights, we can put this in the range 493 grams to 507 grams, but from very carefully made silver dirhams, we can calculate it very much more accurately. Multiple lines of evidence show that the Islamic Ratl Kabir was 16 ounces, each of 10 weight dirhams, each of 48 barley grains, or alternatively 64 wheat grains. That totals 10,240 wheat grains. We also see that the coin dirhams, which aimed very carefully at 60 wheat grains, had a target weight close to 2.9275 grams. Now, 10,240 divided by 60 times 2.9275 equals 499.6 grams. Clearly the Ratl Kabir was again a 500 gram mina. The reason it was called great was surely because of its great age. The Arabs must have got it when they captured the old Sassanid mints intact with their staff. Perhaps someone watching has spotted that this Arabic ounce, fixed around 698 AD, weighed 500 grams divided by 16 equals 31.25 grams, thus very close to the modern English troy ounce. That Arab weight dirham at 31.25 grams divided by 10 equals 3.125 grams, which again is very close to 2 English troy pennies. The Arab troy grains, likewise, are very like those in the English troy weight system. George Hooper noticed all that back in 1721 and correctly deduced that the English system derived not from any other European state, but from the medieval Arabs. That insight has been repeatedly ignored and then rediscovered many times since 1721. In 1967, Skinner at the Science Museum published new evidence that put the Islamic derivation of troy weight beyond reasonable doubt, and he correctly spotted that it was Offa who adopted the Arab system in England in 793 AD. That insight has again been ignored since 1967, as accounted earlier. A full telling of how all that happened must await another day. To sum up, it seems beyond doubt that British troy weight had its ultimate roots in ancient Sumer. Perhaps a crude form of Troy apothecaries had already arrived here in the Bronze Age. The refined form, a 12-ounce monetary pound of 7,680 Troy wheat grains, that is to say 5,760 imperial or barley grains, surely did arrive in the early medieval period and has been preserved here ever since. Today, British 16-ounce Troy weighs about 497.6 grams, a loss of 0.5% after crossing 3,000 miles and 13 centuries.